Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully we will have a good conversation for you all, and you can take something from it. Sports, entertainment, and tech is our topic of the day. I will confess, Scott would like me to get Charlotte to teach me how to do a backflip at some point, but I don't know that this panel is the place for that. I want to start things off. I will ask you both, sports, entertainment, and technology are so intertwined, and they kind of have been as long as sports, as a product have kind of existed, but the intersection probably feels particularly present today. And I'm curious how both of you have kind of approached navigating that and thinking about that throughout your careers as you think, as of yourself sort of as a product and building your brand, and how, those three things kind of collide in your worlds. Paul, you want to start us off? Charlotte?
Sure. I think I have a unique point of view now that I co-founded the Premier Lacrosse League and I operated as its president, so I think about the league and the teams and the players. But prior to that, I was trying to figure out how to grow professional lacrosse just as an athlete, and would say that the technology, in a way, is piloted in sports. And the first streaming live product was an MLB game in the 90s. The first usage of AR was the first down marker in the NFL in the 90s. But prior to that, I don't know how much technology had opened up in sports prior to maybe linear television. But now it's really created the enterprise value that gets us all to South by to talk about it. And for myself as an athlete, it was social media first, because that in 2008, when I graduated from Johns Hopkins, no one really knew if professional lacrosse existed. And it wasn't getting much distribution on any air. So I didn't know what I was going to do. I got a job in commercial real estate and was drafted #1 in the league at the time. But I started a Facebook fan page, and it grew to 50,000 followers almost overnight. And I was having a conversation that would bore the hell out of everyone in the room today at the time about like, hey, I'm checking in, going to the gym. But the novelty of social media was really exciting. So we were building audiences differently, and it allowed an off the beaten path or niche sport like lacrosse to build some type of professional value set. And maybe that's where I'll start, because I'm sure we'll get into all the other technology on this panel.
Hi guys, I always say this before I talk to a room like this, but it's much easier to wrestle in front of 100,000 people than talk to you guys. So my perspective is a little different. I am an athlete and an entertainer, and technology has really given myself and the company an opportunity to engage with their fan base, whether it's following storylines, whether it's going to the individual character and getting to know their brand, them as the real person or them as the character. And for me, how I approached technology or social media was I took my athletic background and I used social media to build this character. How can I stand out on WWE television? And that's showing that a female can be dominant, confident, an athlete and a diva and a sports entertainment in a male-dominated world. And then from there, I realized, okay, this character that I have created is not relatable. It's not likable. So how do I get my fans to engage with me on a more personal level? And that was showing more of myself. And then through technology, listening to see what the fans want or don't like, I use that as homework to grow this character on whether it's Monday Night Raw USA or Friday Night SmackDown. And I think our company does that as a whole for storylines, whether it's leading up to WrestleMania, whether it's SummerSlam, pay-per-views, or even growing a certain talent. Like, okay, we have talent that come from NXT. Do the fans like them? Do the fans know them? How do we know that? I mean, we have 1 billion followers across all platforms, and we listen to every single one of them. But the basis of what we do is, fighting. It's a sport, but also entertainment, and technology has just made that larger than life.
Charlotte, interesting to hear you talk about that, because the WWE obviously is probably, perhaps more so than any other sports league, entertainment is at its core. But there's also this level of sort of mystique and, there's a curtain sort of between perhaps the characters and the fights and the events that happen in the ring and the fans behind the scenes. But social media has, for many athletes, sort of lifted that curtain up. How do you balance, keeping up with technology and continuing to kind of progress in that sense with making sure that you maintain sort of the mystique of WWE and what you do?
Well, since now everyone knows it's not real. I mean,
I can't believe it.
We do yes, it is very physical and accidents happen. And yes, we do. Like, I'm going to beat the hell out of Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania this year. So, yes, Ronda, I said that. But I think what's made, technology special in our business is you get to follow that talent and see what their real life is. Like, you've always wondered, like, what's Stone Cold like? What's Ric Flair like? What's Charlotte Flair like? Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and seeing them in their real life, like, people are almost more engaged with, like, what do I do on my off time? Like, what kind of ice cream do I eat? What are my workouts? Like, what do I do for fun? Versus, like, I'm Charlotte Flair and this is my 14th title win. Like, people really, my fans really want to engage with, like, the person. So that's what's been special about social media. But saying that, yes, it's hard to keep the mystique of the storyline because you don't want to know, like, well, do they really hate each other? Do they like each other? Like, that's what you get invested in, right? Like, the emotion behind, like, man, I really feel good for that good guy and I really hate that bad guy. And sometimes social media can make that hard. But at the same time, what technology has done is be able to further tell those stories beyond the ring to make them even more meaningful, not worrying about the mystique. Do you follow what I'm trying to, like, it's made the storylines even broader and bigger because you can capture what's happening on every single platform, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and put the story in different, you can tell it different ways through those platforms, and everyone's engaging at all times.
Paul, I feel like you and I have talked about this before. There are probably a lot of parallels with the way you guys are approaching the PLL and how important you guys have, or how central you've made sort of media and storytelling in building the league.
Yeah. I think storytelling is at the essence of what we do in sports. It's interesting hearing Charlotte talk about it because I've studied the WWE for quite some time, and I've been lucky to build a relationship with the McMahons and Paul Levesque and even back to Paul E. or Paul Heyman. So studying the art of cutting promos and prior to, really inviting people behind the curtain, the WWE's promo style live event was also a form of narrative storytelling, where an athlete would come out and either present themselves as a babyface or a heel, and the audience would buy in and then have something to root for. In pro sports, on the team sports side, I should say, prior to storytelling, you really pulled for your team and maybe like what you thought that athlete was on that team, but without getting invited into his life, it was still very much team rooting. And like one of the most powerful things in sports is a last second shot or buzzer beater, and that moment gets shared virally, but the moment becomes perennial when you know the two people that were going up for that basket at the end of the fourth quarter, and you know their stories that unfolded leading up to that moment. You know how much contempt they might have for each other, or the trials and tribulations that each of them went through to get to that moment in the NBA Finals or the PLL Championship when you're in overtime. And that's what kind of draws a fan in the most immersive way. And then that's, as a league, as an organization, the way that you can continue to carry attention into future seasons, but also drive revenue across things like merchandise and engage deeper in sponsorship with branded content on a player who scored that last second goal. So all of that is built and like kind of highlights, F1 Drive to Survive, Hard Knocks to the NFL, the Ultimate Fighter in the UFC to what that did in storytelling around who the athletes were, so that we could then, really educate and learn how to watch a match or how to watch a game.
So this is where those "I'm going to the gym" Facebook check-ins become more important.
At the time. So I'll say, like, social media is a really interesting thing. We were talking a little bit this morning. It's reached ubiquity, right? There's like 3 billion people in the world that have a social account. Most of them are not posting, but they're engaging or they're following. It's never been the modern kind of advertising industrial complex, and never more of an inviting place for brands or athletes to build an audience. It's also never been more difficult to build an audience, because as we've reached that social ubiquity in use of these platforms, the end fan is now incredibly discerning around who they're following. It's like their digital identification card, right? They want to follow people that they think they share core values with, that they like, that they don't mind sharing some type of association with when their peer group checks who they're following. So when I was posting those stupid check-ins 15 years ago, the novelty of, oh, wow, we get to follow what Charlotte's doing on a day-to-day or what Paul's doing on a day-to-day, that's worth following. Being an early adopter, that's why a lot of industries put their thumb on that and the value of that is you can build an audience quicker. So that means that your stories and your type of content that you push out needs to be that much more compelling.
So how do you think about this in the context of your athletes in the PLL and what they're doing, and Charlotte, feel free to weigh in here too, and also this concept of IP, right? Because when we talk about tech and entertainment, that's a pretty core principle here, and the PLL seems to have taken the approach that you want your marks out there, right? You want your athletes to be sharing as much PLL content as possible. How do you balance sort of protecting IP and what the league owns and getting that out there for people to see, to kind of try and make that connection as it gets harder to do?
Yeah. Two things that make sports really valuable were the last standing firewall for appointment watching television, meaning every other form of content, the consumer gets to choose when she or he wants to watch it. Even with the series finale or season finale of Euphoria, maybe watch at 8 o'clock, but whenever I'm ready, I'll watch it. And with live sports, you're not going to really see the engagement on a replay, so you're going to watch it when we say you're going to watch it, which is the tip-off or the face-off, or when WrestleMania airs live at 8 o'clock, or now it's like 6 o'clock now. It's like a 5-hour show.
2 nights.
2 nights.
2 nights.
10 hours.
2 stupendous nights.
So you have appointment watching television, which you all know is more valuable for advertisers because we're more likely to watch their ads. And then the second is IP. So what Emily referenced. So we own all of our IP. The WWE owns all their IP. It's why we're both up here today. So league IP, team IP, and image and likeness of players, we package up and sell that through brands and create partnerships around the value of that, because there's just so much bifurcation, trifurcation between valuable IT and sports that makes it really complicated to bring to life in partnership. So what we have done as a league is package all that up. And we have our live rights distribution, we have our partnership strategy, we have our ticket sales strategy, we have our merchandise strategy. All of those categories have changed because of the evolution of tech, right? Merchandise has now, once was probably the 4th or 5th revenue stream for sports leagues, and now in some cases it's as big as 2nd or 3rd because of direct-to-garment consumer tech, where I think WWE does this really well, and we've tried to imitate it in a lot of ways, but Charlotte will do, a figure 8 leg lock, and something will happen, and there will be a quick T-shirt spun up that night on social that you can buy on demand. That never existed prior to new tech. So those are the ways that we are the sole rights holders of our IP, have the benefit of pushing out really unpredictable moments that happen live to our audience to drive more revenue.
It's the end goal, right? You got to keep driving the revenue to keep sustaining the ecosystem.
But I think revenue should always trail attention and kind of like authentic moments. And so you've got to have the right minds in business that that are always on and aware of what's happening. And Charlotte can probably speak to this. the unexpected happens in a match and it's captured, and she knows that if she gets it out sooner than later, it's going to drive more audience engagement. And then there's probably the behind the scenes that you have to figure out.
So I had a recent storyline with an opponent named Becky Lynch, and people couldn't tell on a segment on the main event of a show, was that supposed to happen? Was it not? Was that real? What's really going on? And it drove the storyline and the viewers because it was so left field. And then when they showed the replays of it, replay or captions that whole week of really what happened, they edited out the scene of what happened. So that just added a whole different level to what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that there's some gamification that you can do behind the scenes, maybe as a league, with your athletes, with your team. So you have what happened live, and then you could then get tricky and drive engagement with Charlotte on her Instagram to get her perspective, or maybe unseen footage from the live product to continue the conversation. We call it dominating the splash and owning the ripple. And then in a way you can control the launch that leads to the big splash too. So if you take any piece of content or any story or campaign that you want to do, you can tell the behind the scenes story of what's happened to lead to the moment. Then the moment is the big announcement, or the moment is the big fight. And then how you tell that fight through multiple different angles, or that announcement or campaign through multiple different angles, or extended storylines is your ripple. And you're basically creating a huge conversation around one thing. So you kind of think about the pre, the moment, and the post as storytellers and marketers.
I want to sort of pivot here along the same sort of narrative about kind of controlling some of this as much as you can, and some of that starts with kind of controlling the entertainment product on the field or in the ring, if you will, and figuring out ways you can do that and that you can elevate sort of that experience. I'm curious, Paul, you and I have talked about, whether it's changing the color of the ball or increasing pace of play and doing other sort of advancements to change the game, but keeping it the same, but kind of making it a better consumer product. How do you think about keeping your sport sort of authentic and pure, quote unquote, if you will, but making the best consumer product? In Charlotte, I mean, consumer product is kind of probably very central to conversations you guys have. So I'm curious how you both think about that in the sense of maintaining it, but also maximizing it at the same time.
Well, it's funny for what we do, because really we have a live audience, and live audiences don't lie. So if you want an audience to like something and they're booing, they obviously don't like it. So it's your job as a performer, like, I'm the bad guy. It is my job to make you boo. Yes, they're rarely cheering. But if that's the product that we're putting out there, is this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, this is the story, this is the little package that we're selling into this big pay-per-view, it's your job also as a performer. Then you have the writers to, if you try to over control that story, then it backfires. And that's sometimes what's the beauty of our business, is you get these like magic moments that are organic because things didn't go right. Does that follow? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we think quite a bit about is who is greeting the fan watching on screen. Your talent, the announcers, I know it's really important at WWE too, are the people at home that are narrating the live product, what we're seeing in our living rooms, explaining in a lot of cases, or educating net new fans, but also dramatizing it. And I've seen so many amazing clips in sports that the play-by-play and color commentators just leave it dull, and the amazing play misses. And then you see, like, I saw a side-by-side actually on social yesterday of what an 18th hole putt would look like with a soccer announcer, and vice versa on a penalty kick with a golf announcer.
You want to imitate that for us?
No. But it changed how I felt about golf and how I felt about soccer. And so we think about that, super important. And for niche sports in the past, it often looked at that line item as an expense. And let's get a local crew because it's not as expensive, and our product's on the field. Like, no, you got it wrong. Product's in the booth too. So that's the first thing. The second thing is typically live sports, you either put them in 2-hour blocks. If you're WrestleMania, you can command the world's attention. You can do 5-hour blocks, but a 2-hour block is typically where you're at. So if you're looking at 15-minute quarters, which is what lacrosse used to be, you're really pushing the boundary of like leaking over. And it's really hard to get someone to watch a 2.5-hour game, but as a pro product, you want to have an intro, you want to have a halftime show, you want to have an outro, you want to have good like timeouts and moments you capitalize on. So we shrunk the quarters to 12 minutes so we could fit more comfortably in a 2-hour block with our network partner and do more storytelling around the gameplay. Other things like made the field a little bit smaller. Lacrosse is historically known as the fastest game on 2 feet. It doesn't feel that way because the field's so fucking big. So we made the field a little smaller so you could track the players a little bit better and see end to end. Basketball, as an example, is a court like 5'5", JV players play on the same size court as 7'5" centers in the NBA, and that shows like you watch an NBA game, you see people go end to end. It's more fun. And the last thing that you mentioned is lacrosse, like hockey, we had a similar problem. It's so skilled, and the puck, like the ball moves so fast. For a fan that's not used to watching the game, it's really hard to follow. She sees things in the ring that I don't see, and I see things on the field that she may not see because we're so used to it. And if we're the only ones operating, sometimes we'll miss that because of how immersed we are into our sport. So we figured that out by stepping out and asking questions to people who aren't familiar with lacrosse. And they're like, I don't know how to track the fucking ball. So we changed the ball color. And we didn't have to spend too much time on research because tennis, this sport adjacent to us, had also been testing color palettes for 120 mile an hour ball serves. And they ended up on optic yellow. Great, we don't have to do that, so let's use optic yellow.
I think the only comparison I could think of is you want new viewers every week, right? So as a talent, if you're thinking, okay, what if this Monday on Raw, this Friday on SmackDown, or our third product, NXT, if this viewer has never seen me before, how do I draw a connection for them to know that this is Charlotte Flair? So instead of like the ball color, I think every week I'm thinking, if I have a new viewer out there, how do I make that emotional connection to let them know who Charlotte Flair is as a character? And you either have to do that in 6-minute segments, 8-minute segments, or whether you're given 3 segments, which could be 6, 8, and 8 between 2 commercial breaks. So I have, say, a 3-segment match. I get 3 opportunities in those segments to get a new viewer to connect with who Charlotte Flair is. So that's the only I could think of as the comparison of what I'm thinking during a match.
I have another question. I have a question for you, if that's all right, Emily.
Go ahead.
So when you prepare for a 3-segment show, how much artistic liberty are you giving? And then do you have a routine? Especially the ones where you cut a promo.
So
to get ready.
First, for a match, obviously you have your ending. You have a story that you want to tell, a direction that the company wants you to go. But as the bad guy, or I guess I could say I'm the veteran now, as the most decorated woman, I control the timing and the pacing and the tempo depending on how the crowd is reacting. If a crowd is not reacting, it is your job to get them out of the seats. So like you have different things planned. It's like a dance. And sometimes you have better dances with other partners. But however, I'm also having to do that dance, act, be physical, while also knowing if I have a 3-segment match, I'm coming out in my entrance. That's what, 1.5 minutes? That means I've got 5 minutes to we're going to break, and you have to be stopped with something exciting to crash to break to make sure the viewer wants to come back to break. So all of a sudden, 10, 9, 8, 7, the ref's counting me down, you're about to crash to break. Then you've got a 3-minute break to keep that audience engaged while the live audience doesn't know that you guys are in break shooting commercials. So I have to time the audience within those 3 minutes, knowing that I am coming back live on that second segment in 30 seconds, knowing if that crowd is not cheering, coming back in those 30 seconds when the viewer's tuning in, why do you want to tune in? If there's no action going or no, like you don't want to watch, there's nothing more boring than watching a game and there's not like excitement. That's the same with like wrestling. So that's how much, I know that's a lot, guys. I'm just very passionate about what I do.
It's amazing.
But, sorry, I love my business. But, because people really just don't realize, like, how much really goes into what we do and how hard it is. But all those things, like, because you can't cut off those advertisers.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
those sponsors are huge. And knowing that sponsorship is playing while you're, like, grabbing a headlock. Like, that's a lot going on.
Something that's interesting, I was talking to someone this morning who has been to a number of WWE events, and one of the things they said was, you never, if you are at a WWE event, you don't know that you're on commercial break.
No, you don't. You don't.
Right.
Which is different from a lot of live sporting events where you know when the breaks are happening, there's kind of a lull in the action, but that's not the case with WWE.
No. And that's your job as a performer to pace it, because obviously this sounds bad, but you want your best stuff to be on TV. Not that you're not giving the live audience like the best show, but if you only got if you got 2 segs, each seg is 6 minutes, you're not gonna waste 3 minutes on your best, most spectacular moves if it's not gonna be live. So if you can keep a crowd on pace in the main event, knowing that like you've got to get through those 3 minutes and keep those fans like clapping, sometimes, here's a secret, sometimes we might use it as a little bit of a rest. But like the live audience wouldn't know that. But yeah, that's the beauty of what we do.
I mean, it's the entertainment part as well, And if you're lucky and you go to a match and there's a really awesome dark match, anyone know what a dark match is? Yeah, there you go. That's a match altogether that
Probably
just
like
doesn't show up on TV. And so I think that, entertaining your audience for team sports during commercial timeouts or in between quarter breaks, challenge flags, that's where you bring in the additional staff and they're launching T-shirts in the stands. You cue a DJ and you're trying to entertain an audience that is paying to watch you in person, as the entertainment at home has gotten so much better. So there's actually a ton of pressure on us as organizations to drive more value to the fan who comes on site as technology continues to enhance the product at home, and more investment. And all the more important too, in a world that's so competitive in driving attendance, to continue to build recurring or season ticket holders or recurring ticket purchasers to your product. The way that I explain to people is, and I didn't really understand it until we started, hand-to-hand combat of selling tickets. And I learned from the NBA and the NFL that in a lot of cases we'll have 70-80% season ticket holders. So that means they have 40-person ticket sales staff to sell 2,500 seats a night. It's a lot that goes into one ticket. And all of us, this is the way that I try to relate at home. If you have hosted a holiday party or a birthday party for a friend or a partner, and you send out the invitation in advance, and you get like a little bit nervous as 7 o'clock comes, and you're like, well, who's going to be first? Are people going to actually come? And keep in mind, you're providing the booze, the food, it's free. And you're still worried that your closest friends might not come. That's all. Now if you think about selling a ticket to someone you don't know, to a game that's 2 hours in the sun, in the summer, when they can watch it from their home with a great television experience, awesome kind of technology, and a comfortable couch, it's really hard. And so that's why that's why in between the commercial, you're probably going to see something awesome too at a WWE match.
Paul, speaking of kind of, getting people to come to different games and your different, well, I guess it's probably multiple games because you're trying to get them out to a whole weekend in a new city, because you guys are a tour-based model like WWE. You're kind of going all around. And I'm curious how your brother Mike, who is your co-founder and CEO of the PLL, put out a really interesting Twitter thread the other day, kind of going through, actually I think it was yesterday, going through sort of the back end of picking those cities and making a PLL schedule for a season and all of the different factors that go into that, and something, you know, people probably aren't thinking of, right, is like gas and maximizing sort of your vans that are traveling weekend to weekend. How do you guys approach that with, you know, through this lens of making an entertaining product that is in the right market at the right time, that is getting people there and in those seats like you were talking about?
Yeah, well, it's hugely complex. It's, you know, playing Tetris in a way, because the tour-based model makes a lot of sense and has been very effective and successful for us. And it also, you know, established two things out of the gates. One, we could get a network partner first, so we didn't have to do a traditional home-away city model and take out venues and deal with the venue-to-venue stuff that even the rights holders in the MLS and NFL still have challenges figuring out their schedule when they own the venues, and then you go to the network. So we went to the network first, and then we do tour-based, so we take out Gillette Stadium, and if we have a 2 o'clock window available on a Saturday and a 3 o'clock on a Sunday on broadcast and cable, then we know we can just book those times. We don't have to worry about the back and forth. The other thing is supply-demand curve. So when you come to a city once, like the WWE does, there's more anxiousness and more, I think, calendar blocking by your core fans to go versus having 8 to 16 matches to decide on if they were to come that often. But underneath all that, we don't own the venues. So we look at venue type, we look at lacrosse population density in each of the markets. We then get in the weeds of, you know, summer lacrosse and club sports, which is crazy. And your core audience is basically traveling every weekend, so understanding when the tournaments are. You mentioned our eco footprint, so we don't want to, even if it's attractive from a timing and attendance standpoint, we don't want to go New York City, LA, Philadelphia, Seattle, Atlanta, because that's making us do this across the country, and it's not efficient from a cost standpoint. So there's all these factors that go into it. We start with 300 cities, we get it down to 30, and then we decide on our 15, or in this case it was 14 this year.
And how do you balance that with a goal the league has long stated of growing the sport of lacrosse, not only growing the fan base, but growing it geographically?
Yeah, I think it's critical that, you know, as a sports league or any team, you want to hit the key markets, Northeast, Midwest, South, Pacific Northwest, West Coast, and then you fill the gaps. So, you know, our strategy is one that lacrosse has gone from 2 million fans to 15 over the last decade and a half, but they're dispersed around the country. So let's not only take the sport to them, but also explore new markets, which is probably, in this case, there's 5 new markets of our 14 from the previous year where we can test and learn. And then I think as we continue to grow, which we are, we'll look at transitioning to a geo-based model. But right now, from an operational efficiency standpoint, from a revenue growing, from an attention standpoint, it makes sense to do this across the country.
Charlotte, I'm curious, how you sort of prepare and participate in an event change based on what the event is or where you are, per se?
It really just depends on the story.
Okay.
Like who I'm facing, if the title's on the line, if it's not. Our schedule and how we schedule our shows is a little different. Like I was in Saudi Arabia, I think 3 weeks ago, but I'd been in a different town. Like Friday I was in Birmingham, last night Jackson, Mississippi. Then I'll go to, like, we can go from Saudi
Right.
and then have a show in Atlanta, Georgia 2 days later, just so we can get there to land. So that doesn't really matter for us. But in terms of preparation, everything that leads up to each pay-per-view every month is how we base the story. So anything that you see on a live event in TV is going to push towards watching that one big pay-per-view every month. So right now, everything is based on me versus Ronda and what does that road look like to WrestleMania.
Okay.
So nothing really changed. It just depends on the opponent. That's it.
Right. Does the way you embody how much does the way you embody your storyline and your character depend on the opponent, right? Like what aspects, I guess, of your character do you change or do you alter or do you kind of tweak to depending on the opponent that you're facing?
For me, it really just depends on the opponent. Like how I faced Naomi 3 weeks ago on SmackDown. I think it was one of her first title defenses in a long time. How I act in that story will be a lot different than how I act with Ronda. Like with Ronda, I want it to be best versus best. that's the story. But in the story with Naomi is like, oh my gosh, can Naomi beat Charlotte Flair? So it's working towards, like, I come across more confident or less confident. I mean, the character never really comes across, that's her downfall. But that story particularly was about Naomi, not Charlotte. Where Ronda versus Charlotte is equal playing field. So you really, and you have chemistry with different people. Like how, like, yes, everything is verbatim and scripted, but you can feel that chemistry and emotion different with everybody. So you have to feel that. That's what makes the greats great, is they can adapt to change and make the audience believe that you hate them or like them. It's so crazy, but that's what makes that's the difference between the one you remember and the ones you don't, or the ones that can keep those 100